Excited to be today with Marc Goldman, Director of AEC at Esri. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to having a one-on-one conversation with you.
Would love to learn a lot about the great things you're working on. Can you tell us more about how the science of where, which your company focus on, it can really transform the AEC industry, and they take the digital twin, one building focus to really empower cities on a larger scale and infrastructure?
Everything gets planned, designed, built, and eventually operated somewhere. Everything exists in a location, but often the tools that AEC professionals use don't take into consideration that context. And yet design decisions get made without necessarily understanding weather patterns or traffic flows or demographic information of where your underserved communities might be. When you take that information into account from those earliest phases of an AEC project, your ability to make important decisions is greatly improved. So we're finding that that science of where, the information related to location, serving everything from those very earliest phases of planning and urban design and layout of particular infrastructure through to the design and engineering phase, where decisions need to be made on how big a building might be, or where a roadway might go, or how a water treatment plant might need to serve an extended community. Certainly into construction. Construction, I see as one of the most complex logistics, supply chain types of projects anywhere. And when you take location into consideration and you're able to plan your project and assign your work breakdown structure items to actually a location, your ability to understand and plan those projects is greatly improved. And then taking that digital thread of information through to the operations phase, knowing where your assets are, how they're being used, who is accessing them. Again, location enables better operations and management. So all of those things that I just described are elements of digital twinning, and we're finding ourselves in the middle of the conversations around digital twin because location enables so many workflows.
How is the latest technology you're working on and the integration between BIM and GIS can really transform and empower our sustainable initiatives and reducing CO2 emissions?
Yeah. There's a lot of ways that it's happening. GIS for many years has been a solution that environmental managers and urban planners and those with an interest in these important topics have had access to data. They could see where floodplains might exist. They could understand weather patterns. They would understand where, in relation to a construction site, materials were coming from. So bringing that all together with the BIM information, with project planning tools, is just opening up the eyes of a larger range of people to that information. So you could understand that although you might have chosen to purchase the least expensive product, when you see your suppliers on a map and realize that some of them are coming from thousands of miles away, and the carbon impact of that product coming to your job site might today be less expensive, but the carbon impact is much greater. We also have a solution that we've been developing as a research project, taking the footprints of buildings being derived from imagery, understanding how those buildings are aligned relative to optimal solar gain and optimal energy usage. So using that element of location to better understand existing buildings and how you might retrofit them, or choose to, in fact, tear them down and rebuild them correctly with the proper orientation, with proper materials, with lower carbon impacting products, is just one example of many that I'm seeing.
I see that a great value for retrofit or renovations.
Yeah.
As an owner, for example, I can just look at my building, how it's performing, and according to that, I can give the builder some feedback that could save time and cost as well on how we can make it more environmentally friendly.
That is certainly a place that we're seeing. At perhaps a broader scale, the idea of location applied to where you might put wind farms, where you might want to put solar panels, is very much a location challenge. Your weather patterns, your shading and shadowing, where trees might actually have a negative impact on the ability to generate the wind and generate the amount of light that you need to switch to new alternative energies. We have many construction companies that are using our tools to help manage the placement of those wind farms and those solar farms to construct them most optimally, but prior to that, they were actually located using GIS.
What was a project that really benefited from the integration between BIM and GIS to provide value for the community?
One example that I go to over and over again is San Francisco Airport. They have developed a true digital twin, and I don't use that term loosely, that it comprises the CAD information they've generated over the years, BIM model data for projects that are current, low altitude flights, including drone imagery, space planning information, underground utilities, every single light on the runway, every single door in their facilities, which numbers something like 13,000 doors, are all within a single GIS-based environment that has been populated with these other data sources that they use for safety and security, for locksmithing, for space planning, for making sure that every stripe of paint on the runways is, meeting FAA requirements. They have completely automated, digitized their facilities so that they are not, met by surprises when it comes time to do a renovation, is when it comes time to move a particular retailer from one location to another or expand a terminal.
How it gets updated so it reflects if something changes on site.
It's built into their project execution plan. And I use that term versus a BIM execution plan. They consider GIS. They consider geolocation. So when an architect or an engineer or a construction company delivers the digital artifacts of that project, that content just drops into their digital model like a puzzle piece into a bigger jigsaw puzzle, so that the expansion to a terminal or the renovation of a retail location fits in exactly. They know the assets, they know the connections to the utilities, they know the exact layout and space requirements that new facility is utilizing, and it's just part of their requirements. They do not allow for digital information to be delivered that does not immediately can be actionable.
And that's a living document.
It's a living document. It's a living document accessible through web browsers, through security, so that your locksmith team has access to certain bits of information. Your exterior team who's managing the lights on the runway has the information that they need without infringing on any kind of security issues, which you can imagine an airport has, very rigid and very stringent security. And yet they have digitized this environment that allows them to operate in, the way we might think is quite forward. But it's their day-to-day practice.
And with the drone data, is it photometry or photo-based or LiDAR-based?
Really good question. So they'll capture that information in point clouds, as well as photogrammetry, and then convert it to a 3D mesh, which GIS consumes. So we're bringing in what might be just flat satellite imagery. We bring in photogrammetry information. We generate 3D meshes of high quality. We can overlay a point cloud on top of that as well. We can look at the CAD and BIM information, and then perhaps weather patterns as well. So, the GIS, unlike any other solution in AEC, really is this aggregator of almost any kind of information you can imagine. The proliferation of sensors, IoT, and cameras being combined, with GIS as an underlying technology to visualize and interpret that location-based data, the ability to collect low-altitude imagery from planes and drones and turn those into high-quality 3D meshes, not just photos. All being brought together, I think, is the culmination. I don't think it's any one technology that's going to change the way we look at things, and look back and say, wow, 2024 was just an amazing year because of this one thing. I think it's the integration of all of these solutions that are at our fingertips. They all are available now, but bringing them together and creating dashboards that more people can use and enable the decision makers to do better designs, manage construction projects better, operate facilities more efficiently, with all of these information coming together and being understood and understanding how the work that we perform today might be applied to be more effective, more productive, improve the work on the next project. One of the things that I heard at a conference recently is how risk is not managed well in construction. What we do with risk is we build it into the cost of the project rather than try to reduce the risk itself. And I think this information can help reduce risk. It can help us be better informed for the next project because it's not just spreadsheets that we can't tap into, but it's visualization of data. It's data that is ready to be utilized in AI-like solutions.
What do you think AI really means and how we can really utilize it for the future? And is it a buzzword or deeper than that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit buzzwordy right now. But I think it's much deeper than that, I'll say in the same breath. I don't think AI is necessarily going to replace anyone's job, but the person who knows how to use AI is going to replace the person who hasn't figured it out. In the world of the built world and GIS in particular, AI is being able to look at the massive amounts of data we have, whether that's the hundreds or maybe even thousands of projects that a construction company has executed over the years that is already somewhat structured, and being able to tap into that and find patterns to improve the way construction is executed, or the thousands and thousands, maybe millions of images that are available that are typically just perceived as flat imagery or maybe a 3D mesh, but to be able to look at those images and understand where rivers are encroaching on people, where floodplains are likely to rise, where people are expanding population, and where we likely and should best be expanding our communities. Or even just very more pragmatically, where a city can look at imagery and say, it looks like these permits are not being executed to match the construction that's happening. People are building where they weren't permitted to, or these particular buildings should have solar panels put on top of them because they're optimally suited. So let's fund that solar development versus this other one. So I think AI applied to some real low-hanging fruit types of problems can change the way the built world gets designed and built. Not to mention things like DALL-E and the great image processing tools that can certainly inspire designers and architects with new building ideas. But I don't see those tools replacing people. I think it's just enhancing the decisions they're already making.
That's a great point, because having the data is something, but utilizing it and analyzing to be useful to inform decisions is something else. And AI can play a big role.
Yeah, I mean, there's a stat that I've heard over and over again recently is 90% of the information, the data that is created in the AEC industry goes unused. It gets created for one particular purpose and then put on a shelf. It's structured in many degrees, but it is not tapped into for the next project. Because it is essentially, unusable without a whole lot of effort. But I think AI can tap into those data sources and hopefully turn that 90% of data going unused after the project maybe a little bit lower as it gets applied to the next project that we can do a little bit better.
Absolutely. And then we can focus on what really matters with our expertise. To your point, I love your point there that it's not going to replace anybody's work. Thank you so much, Marc, for joining us today and sharing all your great depth of knowledge for the science of where.
It was my pleasure to be here. I love talking about these topics, and it was great to have the conversation with you, Amr.
Thanks.